Introduction to the Bible, Session 17, the Book of Revelation. Let's begin with the authorship. There are different ideas about the author of this book. Chapter 1, verse 1 simply says that the author is John. The question is, which John was this? There are different Johns in the New Testament and different possibilities. John Mark was the travel companion of Paul and Barnabas, but the writing style is different than the Gospel of Mark, so that's unlikely. Some people say that this work is pseudonymous, which means that someone used John's name. But that's highly unlikely because this is an unusual thing for the early church to do. A third option is the author of the fourth Gospel, known as the Beloved Disciple. A fourth option is John the Elder, as distinct from the Apostle John. The early church historian Eusebius offered that idea. A fifth option is a composite work from the circle and followers of John the Baptist, but that would make this not Christian, and that does not work. A final option is John the Apostle. This would be, most scholars believe, the same one who wrote the Gospel of John. He was a Palestinian Jew, a disciple of Jesus. Of these options, the traditional approach is John the Apostle, the beloved disciple who wrote the fourth Gospel. That is a very good option for us. Modern scholarship questions authorship because of the lack of internal evidence. It is a good idea to trust the tradition and think that the Apostle John is the author. There are also some questions about the dating of this. This is a letter sent to the 7 churches in the Roman province of Asia. The range of dates go all the way from the Emperor Claudius, which is very early, 41 to 54 AD, to Trajan, which is very late, AD 98 to 117. The majority position dates this to the reign of Domitian, who reigned from 81 to 96, or the Roman Emperor Nero, who reigned from 54 to 68. As one reads this book, it is clear that those who are reading it are undergoing the time of persecution. There is persecution under both of these Roman emperors, but the more official persecution was under Domitian towards the end of the 1st century. Reception of the book by the early church. It was written to the 7 churches of Asia Minor. It is likely that all 7 churches received this book early on. The early heretic Marcion and the Eastern Church did not accept Revelation as part of the canon. It was also used by heretical groups like the Montanists. The church in the West accepted it by the 2nd century onward. After the 4th century, the Eastern Church also accepted it officially at the Third Council of Constantinople in AD 680. 4 basic ways to approach the book of Revelation. One way is called the contemporary historical. This idea is that Revelation has already been fulfilled in history. There are 2 perspectives about this. It was fulfilled by the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70, or with the fall of Rome in AD 46. People attribute Babylon, as in chapter 19, as referring to Rome. The problem with this view is that the victory of the book was never completed. The historicist is another perspective. This idea is that all history is covered from time of the author to today. The problem is that there's no agreement among interpreters what all this means. A third approach is called the eschatological or futurist. This emphasis is on the end of time. It is held by dispensationalism and other groups. Revelation talks about everything at the end of time which is still in the future. The problem, this does not speak to the original time and audience of the 7 churches. A fourth approach is the timeless approach. Revelation is simply symbolic and timeless, and it's not related to any specific historical period. The problem is that there's no completion or end to the story. It is pessimistic and circular. Evaluation of these 4 approaches. There's a little bit of truth in all of them, and probably it would be good just to take a little bit of all as our understanding of Revelation. In other words, Revelation both spoke to the 1st century, to the 7 churches, but it is also timeless in that there are principles that fit in any time period, but it also speaks about the future and the unfolding of God's plan in the end days. The structure of the book. There are two major ways to approach this text. The first is straight chronology. We read it from front to back, and the events take place in the order that they are stated. Another approach is called the recapitulation approach. It is a more topical approach. The book builds to a climax by repeating points. Revelation contains more Old Testament references and allusions than any other New Testament book. And one more word about symbolism. Revelation is full of symbols. There is much debate about how to interpret these symbols. Should they be taken literally, or should they be referring to something that is beyond our understanding? There are many debates and questions about how to approach and how to interpret some of the difficult symbolism and metaphoric language of the book of Revelation. The contents of this book. It begins chapter 1 like a letter. It is written by John. He is exiled on the island of Patmos because of his witness for the Lord. While he is there, he has a vision of Jesus and of the throne scene of God and events that will take place at some time in the future. In chapter 1, John also has a vision of Jesus that is outstanding and full of glory. Chapters 2 to 3 are letters to the 7 churches of Asia Minor. Each letter follows an outline. There's a common preface, which is a charge to write to the angel of each church. The author is identified, and the author of each of these 7 letters is Jesus Christ. There is some description of him. Third is the body of the letter. It is both positive and negative warnings. It contains words of encouragement, censure or critique, counsel or warning. And then it ends with a conclusion. So there are 7 churches and 7 letters. Each of these churches has something, a challenge, either persecution or perhaps there are moral problems. There might be issues of sin and commitment, a lack of love, or other types of things. It was difficult to be a Christian in that time, and these Christians had to live in pagan and immoral societies full of idols. Chapters 4 and 5 describe the worship around the throne of God. John has a vision now of God on his throne, and then in chapter 5 of the Lamb. John is taken to heaven where he sees these visions, a vision of God's throne. In chapter 5, there is the problem of the scroll that no one can unseal. Only the Lamb who is worthy can unseal the scroll. The scroll represents God's plan for the end of time. In chapters 4 and 5, there are hymns or songs of worship of those who are gathered around God's throne. The next 2 chapters, 6 and 7, deals with the opening of 7 seals of the scroll. John sees a vision of 4 horsemen and 6 seals. In chapter 7, there's a pause, and then the 144,000 is described, a great multitude also in white robes. In chapter 8 through 11, there is the blowing of 7 trumpets. The first 4 trumpets are sounded in chapter 8. Then 3 woes are pronounced. The 5th trumpet, a second woe, the 6th trumpet, and then there's an interlude and a time for reflection in chapters 10 through 11. In chapter 11, there's the 3rd woe and the blowing of the last trumpet. God's plan for humanity is unfolding. In chapter 12, we get the story of the woman, the dragon, and the child. There have been debates and questions about who these represent, whether that might be Mary, Satan, and the baby Jesus, or something else. Chapter 12 describes the war in heaven and on earth. There's the defeat of the dragon, and then the dragon wars on earth. Chapter 13 is the vision of 2 beasts, the beast from the sea and the beast from the earth. In chapter 14, the Lamb and the 144,000 is discussed further. And then there are 7 bowls in chapter 15 and 7 plagues in chapter 16. The number 7 is symbolic in the book of Revelation. In chapter 17 through 19 is the fall of Babylon. John has a vision of Babylon, and Babylon falls in chapter 18. There's a scene change and transition in chapter 19. There have been questions about who Babylon represents too. In the ancient days, especially the early Christian time, Babylon represented Rome. And then Revelation ends with the final defeat of evil. The rider on the white horse appears, and he is Jesus coming in power. And then this is followed by a 1,000-year reign. There are 2 critical questions we need to ask. What is the relation between the millennium and the second coming of Christ? How does one interpret apocalyptic literature in general and the reference to 1,000 years in Revelation 21 through 7? There have been 3 common views. One is called amillennialism. The "a" in front of that means no millennialism. This position takes the 1,000-year reign of Christ as symbolic. Premillennialism is that Jesus will return before the 1,000-year reign, which is taken as a literal time period. Postmillennialism offers that Jesus will return after 1,000 years of Christian influence. There has been a lot of debate over how to take that 1,000-year reign, as symbolic or literal. There's a temporary imprisonment, followed by Christ's 1,000-year reign, and then the doom of Satan, followed by the judgment of the dead. A new heaven and a new earth is described in chapter 21. A new Jerusalem. God is present with his people forever. There are 7 statements from God in chapter 21, verses 5 to 8. This is followed by a description of the New Jerusalem. The vision is introduced, and then the external description of the city and the internal description of the city. This is a city that we very definitely want to be a citizen of. And then the book of Revelation closes. Jesus is coming again. We get the testimony of Jesus and John's reaction and testimony, a caution of the angel, and instruction of the angel. There's a promise from Jesus, a beatitude, and the authority of the one who speaks, followed by an invitation, a warning, and assurance. The book of Revelation is difficult to interpret, but there are many important ideas found in Revelation. What can we learn about God? God is sovereign. God is eternal. God has a plan for humanity. God is in control, and we do not need to worry. What do we learn about Jesus? There are very high things said about Jesus. Many things that describe God also are used to describe Jesus. We know he is coming. He will be the judge. He is also the Redeemer who provides for those who will put their trust in him. What do we learn about God's people? God's people must remain true under persecution. They must remain faithful and pure, and not to be defiled by the cultures around them. Even in the midst of persecution, believers should stay true to their witness. What do we find out about sin? Sin is real. Sin is something that we must be cautious about and avoid at all costs. Those who are sinful must repent of their sins before it is too late. Jesus is coming again. The Bible ends with this promise, and we must put our hope and faith in this, and we must live and be ready as faithful followers of Jesus.